Let's look at the Smart Data Selection feature in MChart Pro. Here, you can see an existing chart that's already in our database. This chart is using the external data feature inside of MChart Pro, which means the data is being pulled from another source, in this case, Google Sheets. You'll find the Smart Data Selection toggle underneath the External Data UI. If we turn the external data feature off, you'll notice that the toggle is still there. Smart Data Selection is on by default for all data sources and automatically reviews your data, identifies anything that looks incorrect or would cause MChart to fail when parsing the data, and excludes those items. In this example, it's excluding just one item, the first cell. We have a multi-series data set here with years for labels and each country indicating a series of data. With data of this type, MChart Pro expects that first cell to be empty. However, as you might expect, that isn't always how people structure their data, especially when it's coming from an external data source like this one. For example, having a column labeled country makes perfect sense to the person who entered this data, and this feature ensures that isn't a problem. I also want to walk through a few more examples of how Smart Data Selection can correct issues for you. When data is entered manually, we directly control the format and can make sure it works correctly in MChart. When using the external data feature, you can't always rely on incoming data being formatted the way MChart expects. So I'm going to pull this same data again from Google Sheets. This time, when the data loads, you'll notice a few changes. It looks like someone added a country but didn't add any data for it. Smart Data Selection detected that, recognized it as invalid data, and excluded it. It also gives you a small report showing exactly what it's doing. You can see that it says, ignoring the first cell, column M, and row 6. It mentions column M, and although we're not looking at column M right now, if we scroll over to it, we can see that someone added a new year, but, again, didn't enter any data for that year. As a result, Smart Data Selection excludes that column, which makes sense because it allows the chart to continue rendering the way we would expect. If someone later adds data into one of those rows or columns, and that row or column becomes a valid source of data, the feature will recognize that and handle it appropriately. For example, let's say someone enters a value for Spain into that year. At that point, the data becomes valid. Smart Data Selection detects that change, stops excluding the column, and now that data appears on the chart. In automatic mode, this feature does its best to resolve issues on its own, but there may be cases where it doesn't behave exactly the way you want, or where automatic behavior simply isn't ideal. With that in mind, you can turn off Smart Data Selection. When you do, manual data selection becomes available. From there, you can choose whether to remove that first cell, which it had been handling automatically, and you can also exclude entire rows or columns of data if needed. For instance, in this case, this isn't a full set of data yet, so we may not want to include it. We can exclude it, and once we do, it's removed from the chart. Manual mode gives you more control over exactly how this works. You can set it to inclusion mode, like it is now, where each selected column or row is included. Or you can switch it to exclusion mode, where each selected column or row is excluded instead. You can also choose to allow additional data to be included in the chart if it is added later, or leave it at the default in manual mode, where it only allows the rows or columns you've already approved. Hopefully, this gives you a clear idea of the power of this feature, the kinds of issues it can handle, and how helpful it can be, especially when you're working with external data.